In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the fundamentals of drawing hair. Now, the good news is that drawing hair is actually pretty straightforward and pretty easy, as long as you follow a key few set of rules. And we're going to take a look at these fundamentals right now. First thing that we're going to look at is looseness and flow. And looseness and flow really refers to us being very loose with our hands when we're drawing the lines for the hair. Whether we're working in rough or refined, we want to be loose and flowy. And really what this means is that we get very smooth lines with no kinks or any weird wobbles on them. And in addition, we get beautiful tapers at the end of the lines, which are great for implying hair strands. So looseness and flow are quite pivotal. When we draw lines slowly, we tend to get two things happening. We get a lot of strange kinks in the hair that just really ruin the effect of smooth hair strands. And in addition, we also get really strange tips, sometimes very flat tips that just end and lack dynamism. So we really want to avoid drawing our lines for our hair slowly. It's really pivotal. The next thing that we're going to take a look at is directionality and gravity. And what this refers to is the effect of how hair sprouts from the head and then is pulled down by gravity across the face, the sides, and the back of the head. So hair kind of comes out of the roots and the top of the head, kind of like a plant sprouting. And it really has a lot of directionality to it, where it's fanning out in a star-like pattern from a central root area or from their point of origin and being pulled down by gravity across the side of the face. So keep in mind directionality and gravity in the hair. You don't want all your hair coming from one single location. It's going to look very strange, right? Make sure that the hair is stemming from multiple points across the head and is moving around the skull. The important thing to keep in mind here is that the hair is definitely built on forms in manga and anime style drawings. It is not purely symbolic. It definitely is form-based. And on that note, we're going to move on to the third thing, which is hair volumes. So as the hair sprouts from the top of the head, what happens is the hair strands build on top of one another. And what this means is that at the top of the scalp, we tend to have a degree of volume. So we never draw the hair as if it's stuck to the scalp like glue, or that it's super wet or super thin and stuck to the skull. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that the hair kind of floats above the skull and that there is a lot of volume to the hair. And on that note, many female character designs in terms of manga style tend to have very rounded tops of their heads. Now, of course, this depends on the manga, it depends on the style and the sub-style, but keep this in mind. It's a very common attribute that girls will have very smooth, round tops of their head before the hair goes into its stylization as it comes down the side of the face. So do keep that in mind. Next, we're going to talk about masses and clumps and the overall shape. When we're drawing in a manga style, a lot of the time, our particular manga or our anime look or anime characters will have the similar set of eye designs. They'll have similar proportions of the face, and we have very few elements, in a sense, to differentiate one character from another. And so the hair becomes essential when we're thinking about the overall shape of the hair to allow us to indicate that each character is different from each other character. Of course, we also have elements such as their proportions, their body types, their clothing and their outfits, the colors of their hair and their eyes. But the actual shape, the overall shape of the hair, in a sense, the graphic shape of the hair, is quite pivotal in defining a character's look. Now, when we're building out the hair, we want to make sure that instead of doing many strands everywhere, we're building out big clumps of forms. So in this instance, I'm going to build out a big clump of form here, and another big form here, and another one here as well. And I want to imagine these as 3D forms. And I'm putting in these contour lines so I can help myself understand and imagine them as three-dimensional forms, just big masses. Don't worry about individual strands when you are just planning the overall masses and the overall shape. And while you're doing this, it is the right time to think about, how does this overall shape look for this particular character? Is it good to define the character that they are, that it's a clear indication of that character? And so we start with these masses and these clumps, and we build an overall shape when we're doing the hair first, before we go into detailing the hairlines. So on that note, we then don't want to overstrand. We want to keep our line overlaps simple and clear when we're doing the refined drawing of the hair, even in the rough stage. And so when we're rendering this out, let's lighten this up just a little bit. We can start adding more strands as we're roughing in the shapes a little bit better. But we're building these overlaps and these strands on top of those forms. And we want to make sure we're not putting too many lines in the hair. If we have too many lines inside the internal shape, it starts becoming very unclear, and unfortunately it also becomes a type of focal point in terms of the character's design, and we don't want that, because the hair itself shouldn't be a focal point of a character. The eyes and the face should be. So you can see here in this very simplistic rendering of the hair, we don't have crazy lines coming down the hair everywhere like this. We tend to want to leave a lot of empty space inside here and really be very cognizant of our line overlaps. So wherever we create line overlaps, we're creating depth, we're adding depth to the image. So keep this in mind. It's okay to have a few strands in the hair. I'm not saying don't do it anywhere, but if you begin to overstrand, you lose the stylistic look and aesthetic of manga stylized drawings. So keep things simple and don't overstrand the hair. Right, let's now take a look at just the rough and the refined workflow of doing the hair. And I have an example here of a sample rough, which is a rough drawing that I'd previously done. And we can see here the general massing, a very similar hairstyle to what we've seen before. We have this general mass over here, another mass over here, something like that, and a third mass over here. And what has happened is we've made sure that there is that space between the skull and the top of the hairline as well, so that we can give our character's hair some volume. And then when it comes time to do the clean lines, we want to be very loose, very flowy, and we don't have to stick exactly to the rough plan. We want to choose a natural look with less control over a static look with more control. What I mean to say is, don't feel that you have to trace these lines exactly really slowly. You're going to lose looseness and flow. Rather, use your underlying rough as a guideline, and then feel free to be very loose and flowy in how you render out these lines. So you can see here, I may not follow it exactly, but I get a very loose and natural look because I'm allowing the lines to just flow. And that's totally okay. You want that to happen because it gives the work a very natural and loose look to the hair. And in this instance here, I totally didn't even follow the plan, but it still looks okay. So this is how you keep a natural look in the hair. make sure you're very loose and very flowy. Final, very, very important element of drawing hair fundamentals is that we want to make sure that we are not creating a sawtoothed look. So let's just move this image out of the way. Our sixth point here is no sawtoothing, and I'll explain what that is now. So typically, when someone is new to drawing anime or manga styles, it's common for them to do what is called sawtoothing, where they're drawing these manga style blades, something like this. And the problem here is that these strands are each almost the same. They have a very similar repeating pattern. We have a lot of parallels, and this is very, very unappealing. So don't ever sawtooth. Make sure that every strand is different from the next strand. And a key to doing this is understanding a particular area of composition in terms of shape, size, proportions to one another. And a good way to manage your flow is big, small, and medium. And what that means is instead of having a big strand and a big strand and a big strand, you can have a big strand and a small strand and a medium strand and a big strand again, maybe even bigger, and then a smaller strand, a medium strand, and you can see that not a single element or hair clump here is the same. And you can see that taking place in the example here, where we have this very big strand and a medium-sized strand, a smaller strand, maybe to another medium-sized strand, into this big strand over here. And we have a constantly changing size relationship between each of these clumps. So here we have a big strand, and this one's sort of medium-ish, the next one's bigger. And so as long as the flow is constantly different, big, small, big, medium, small, medium, big, small, something like that, you want to make sure that nothing is the same. And that is very, very important to achieving a natural look as well. So in ending, using these 6 fundamentals of drawing hair, you'll be able to create a massive variety of hairstyles and draw them in a fundamentally correct way. Even if you're not drawing anime and manga, these really are the fundamentals of drawing hair. In the next lesson, we're going to deep dive some specifics to the anime and manga style of hair in terms of stylizing the hair more for that particular look. That's the end of this lesson, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Let's now take a quick look at the idea of clarity and overlaps in our manga style hair. Now, when we're drawing out our hair, we're busy building our hair clumps, we're trying to get the overall shape. We really want to strive for simplicity and clarity in the 2D iconographic view of the hair. Now, we're still building the hair on 3D forms, but we want the overall look to be unique, appealing, but simple. This is very useful, especially when we need to constantly redraw the same character at different angles, at different poses, in different comic panels or manga panels. It's very, very critical that we achieve a unique and appealing look that is simple. And then we can expand on the simplicity of the rough by adding more strands and more clumps and adding the details. So keep your manga styled hair and the designs unique, appealing, but also quite simple and very clear. In addition to this, we want to make sure we're being very careful with our line overlaps. And we want to make sure that our lines are overlapping, helping the viewer to understand what is in front and what is behind. When we fail to do line overlaps, we're taking away from the piece. We're taking away dimensionality and forms. We really want to be careful that we're not tangenting our hair strands together, where it's very unclear to the viewer what is in front and what is behind. We simply cannot tell. Rather, when we have clear overlaps, we can see that this strand is in front, this strand is behind, and this strand is behind that strand, because the overlaps are very, very clear. These are just two very important things to keep in mind as we move forward drawing manga styled hair. I'll see you in the next lesson. We're now going to take a look at some key foundational shapes we can use to build out some great manga and anime style hairstyles. These do not represent all the possible options, but they do give you a solid foundation for building out a lot of hairstyles. So let's take a look at each of these elements one at a time, and we're going to build them out on this head model. So the first thing is that we want to keep in mind just a general use of lines themselves in our clumps. And typically these lines are used to give off a kind of a messy vibe. So let's get a basic hairstyle going here. Just get some big clumps down. We're going to add all of these elements to this particular hairstyle. So she's going to have kind of crazy hair, but we're going to start with something basic first. So when we just add single lines to the character's hair, it tends to make it look like their hair is scruffy or messy. So you can just add a line in here and there, and it gives it a little bit of a roughed up look. The next very popular shape is something called flicks. And effectively, flicks are banana-like types of shapes that have very sharp tapers on both ends. So instead of a look like this, we have this type of look, where the flicks come in many shapes and sizes, and even can have super heavy weighting on one side and very thin on the other. And we can simply just add them to various ends of the hair. So we can just add a flick just like that. The important thing is to make sure that the flick tapers on both ends. You can add a flick to the top of her hair there, put in another little one here, and we can have one, we can actually turn this hair strand into a flick right here. And they're great for adding diversity into the hair as well. Don't use too many of them, it will look very messy, but you can really do some fun things, and there are a lot of anime and manga characters that have a big fringe flick, something like that, just popping right off just, the fringe of the hair. So think about how you can use flicks dynamically. Next thing I'm going to take a look at are swoops. And swoops really swoop over the hair. They usually have a space within them to indicate that they're swooping over the hair. So in a smaller version model here, we would have the hair kind of coming down like this maybe, and a piece of hair coming off the main piece of hair with a space in between. And you can have swoops running all around. So going right over the front to the back to the front. So in this instance, we're just going to add a crazy swoop to her hair. Let's add an outer swoop, something like that. Just reinforcing that main line there. And here we've got the space in between that swoop. And we'll have a swoop coming from the front of her hair. Let's just pull a random one here, going to the back of her hair. So flick-like in nature, although it doesn't have to be with the tapering ends. Got our space there. And then in addition, we can have overlaps. So this is not in terms of line overlaps, this is in terms of hair overlaps. And really, when we have a smooth section of the head, particularly the top and the sides of the hair, we can indicate an overlap by creating a shape that kind of stacks like a staircase to show that there is hair overlapping the base of the hair. So in this instance, let's just add an overlap here and an overlap here. And you can see it's a very effective technique for building up volumes. And these hair overlaps here and here really sell the three-dimensionality of that. And you can do really awesome things with overlaps, including building plaits into them. We'll look at plaits in a moment. But it's a very, very cool technique, especially when used here at the root of the hair. You can just build in a few overlaps. Don't forget the fanning out nature of the hair clumps themselves. But you can see how effective the overlaps really are. Really cool tool. And number 5, we can do curls. And really what we're doing is we're just hinting at hair that has been physically curled. in one way or another. And so we have to really think about what the shape of this is going to look like, because we're building out effectively a circular type of form that repeats. So we have an ellipse at the top. It's a little bit rough here, and can build into smaller curls and eventually come out. So we can do these types of curls in many different ways, but effectively we're building things in terms of a spiral and then building hair forms based on the spiral design, making sure it's clear to the viewer where the overlaps are so they can have a good understanding of how the curls are actually occurring. And then for number 6, we can have plaits, or braids in a sense. And really, this is based on a basic T shape. It can be quite tricky at first when you're trying to do it, but effectively, we build out a T shape, like so, and we keep building this T shape over and over and over, and you'll see how we can modify the edges of this to create a plait shape. So we can link these together like this, and we get a quite convincing looking plait design. Of course, there's many ways to do braids. You can group circles together in this type of fashion as well and just link them together. It depends obviously on the type of braid. Try to avoid doing something where you're putting X shapes in unless you're going to go on the edges and really define each of the hair clumps more in depth. But leaving them as X shapes really takes away any overlaps. It becomes very tangenty and it can look very flat. So definitely outline those X shapes. And here we can put in just a short braid here. And we can build our T shapes down. And then really go in and add in the outer edges to get a very convincing looking plait. Of course, there are millions of ways to create great hairstyles. Definitely go and grab tons of real-world reference for hairstyles and ask yourself how you can use the manga fundamentals you've learned to bring it into a manga style. Because effectively, all the hairstyles in manga are informed by some type of real-world hairstyle, barring those crazy styles where, you know, some weird floaty things are happening where the hair is bending in strange ways. Just want to get this curl diagram in here, just so we get a general idea of it, just for your notes. Now, in addition to all of this, when we're talking about generally drawing the lines of the hair, we can definitely take an approach of thinking about the curves of our lines. So I'm just going to take this sample and make it a little bit smaller. And when discussing the curves of our lines, you want to think about your lines in terms of S curves and C curves, as well as straight lines. So when a character has more wavy hair, they may have flatter hair on the top, but as the hair comes down, it moves into S curves. When you follow through with the S curves, you have very nice wavy hair. When you're using C curves, on the other hand, you have straighter types of hair. And a very common shape in manga style hair is to have a straight with a very weighted curve at the bottom, moving up into a tapering curve. So you can see there's a lot of weight and heaviness at the bottom of the hair strand here. And that is a very common shape to see. But of course, you can iterate and you can create your own types of hairstyles. Finally, something else we definitely need to touch on is that manga hair can sometimes do crazy things in terms of adding random straight lines into the curved nature of the hair. So for example, if this character were to have a crazy fringe coming out, it's entirely possible that it starts as a dead straight line and then comes out in a way like that. Right? We add the curve and we add the strands to that shape. And this is a common thing to see, where it adds a really nice stylistic edge to the hair design. In fact, you can use these straight edges in many places. So if we assume that her hair came up very round here, it wouldn't be odd to have a very straight line here before the hair rejoined as a curve here. Now, this is, of course, bringing things into the more symbolic realm, into more of the abstract realm, but it's not unusual to see, and it can add a great stylistic edge to the work. And you will see in the upcoming demos, I've done long hair strands of a girl character that just have a lot of straight edges in them. So do look out for that. But don't be afraid to mix up your curves, your S curves, your C curves, and straights to create various types of hair designs. That's the end of this lesson, and I'll see you guys in the upcoming demos. Moving on to a more simplified style, more of a cutesy style. So really, if you're constantly thinking about the sizing specifically, you'll be pretty much on the right track to getting a natural looking hairstyle. You can see there was some parallels there in two of those spikes. Moving on to Go, just establishing the big basic forms. She's got front bangs, that's one separate form, and then she's got the rest of her hair, the sides and the back. And her hairstyle is primarily made up of C curves with a few S curves, slight S curves in here and there, just to give it a bit more of a wavy look. Here she has a straight cut fringe. But again, even in a straight cut fringe, utilizing this big, small, medium, and the variance of the shapes to keep things looking natural. Also emphasizing the line overlaps here for the bangs, so that they're clearly bangs. They're coming in front of the character's head and in front of the rest of the hair. And then using a few overlaps at the top of the head, some straights, just to add some diversity to the overlaps there. She's got very long hair strands, very long, swoopy kind of hair strands. Once again, keeping interior strands minimal, only putting a few where you need them, but not going too crazy, just putting thousands of lines in the hair can be very, very distracting for the viewer. And a little flick at the top of her head. More of a simplified style. This character is Roku. And I decided after the rough stage to add in additional hair strands coming out the front of her to give her a bit more of a definitive look. So she has a lot of straight angles in her hair, a lot of right angles. Again, this is very much stylization. It's an exaggeration of the bends of the hair. It's not to say that it's not physically possible with gel. It's not something that you commonly see in normal hair. And very important to emphasize line overlaps in these types of hair shapes for a natural look. small, medium going